Hello everybody, this is ManuS and welcome to the next part of the MTG Arena set review for the new set War of the Spark. Today we continue with the first half of the blue cards. Before we do this, you know the drill. Hit the subscribe button, turn on the notification icon to not miss out on the rest of the series, and please consider whitelisting YouTube on your adblock or just turning it off. Alright, let's get going with the first half of the blue cards. So first we have Ashok's Skulker. This is clearly a limited only card. In limited, it seems fine, like 5 mana 3/5 is usually underwhelming, but the fact that you can turn it into an unblockable threat, sure, 4 mana is quite a lot each turn to keep it going, but it's a decent stall breaker, so it seems like a fine filler and better than your average 5 mana 3/5, but nothing particularly impressive. Then we have Augur of Bolas, the return of an old staple. So yeah, Augur of Bolas was at times pretty good and constructed, and it might very well be good and constructed again. 2 mana 1/3 that gives you selective card advantage is pretty nice. It forces you though to warp your deck heavily around instants or sorceries, but this, for example, might be a nice fit in, say, Izzet type decks like Drakes, Phoenix type decks, for example, due to having a lot of synergy there and also providing early defense for these decks, which they sometimes lack. Augur of Bolas, for example, seems amazing against White Weenie and Mono Red, two of the more challenging matchups of this archetype. So yeah, Augur of Bolas seems like a really sweet addition to Constructed, and this is just like scratching the surface of what he can do. There's obviously a whole amount of decks he could go into, or even decks that could spawn around the card. And in limited, well, a 2 mana 1/3 is usually decent, and if you have enough spells, it gets really good. So yeah, if your deck is, let's say, a bit more spell heavy than usual, this gets better and better, but more often than not, if your deck is not aggressive and would just run like a 1/3 for 2 with some marginal upside, Augur of Bolas seems like a great fit because it will still usually draw you like a fraction of a card. So it is still a quite good 2 mana 1/3, even though it won't draw a card that often. Next we have Aven Eternal, the first Mass card. It's a 3 mana 2/2 flying, which is a fine baseline, nothing too exciting, especially these days. Wind Drakes have been better in the past, and these days they usually come with some upside to make them good, but this one is a pretty good one, I would say. Yeah, it gives you a mass 1, which means either you get a 1/1 zombie token or you put a +1/+1 counter on your existing zombie army token. All in all, a pretty good deal for the cost and for common, so this seems like one of the yeah, higher quality commons in the color. Next we have Bond of Insight. It's a 4 mana sorcery that mills both players for 4, and then you get to return up to 2 instant and or sorcery cards from your graveyard to your hand and to exile Bond of Insight. So yeah, this seems pretty interesting. Another card that could be interesting for the kind of Augur of Bolas decks, or especially the Izzet spell decks. Especially with Electromancer, making this one cheaper, playing like turn 2 Electromancer, turn 3 this. It also means the self-mill makes it more likely to have 2 things to return, even if you haven't played a lot of spells this game, which is a significant upside. And basically 4 mana draw 2 is not that good, but 4 mana draw 2 non-lands, like 2 high-impact business cards, and giving you some selection of what those cards are is pretty nice. So this card isn't like super great, but it is pretty solid, and I think it has some potential constructed implications and might be interesting, but I'm not 100% sure. It could also end up being a bit too clunky and situational in the end and not be that good, or at least be playable in small numbers. And in limited, it seems kind of tricky to make work. You usually don't have that many spells, and you don't want your deck usually to be that spell heavy. Maybe it works a bit better here because we have a bunch of spells that have a mass, which makes them effectively creatures, so you can run less actual creatures, but still have a good creature count. So maybe there will be some fringe decks that can support this in Limited, but all in all, I think it's not going to be that good of a card in Limited more often than not. Next we have Callous Dismissal. Speaking of spells that make bodies, here we have a 2 mana, return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. Kind of the go-to thing these days. The last one that we saw had Surveil 1, this has Amass 1, so they usually come with a minor upside to compensate for the fact that they are fairly expensive for what they do and don't trade 1-for-1 in card economy. So yeah, Amass 1, pretty nice here. Also it can add up quickly, like, I don't know, you can even sometimes, for tempo, go turn 2, Callous Dismissal, bounce something, then on turn 3, play the Aven, make the token a 2-2, attack for 2, so it's effectively like you played a 2-2 on turn 2, but also got the like tempo from bouncing your opponent's 2 or 3 drop to put them behind on tempo. We'll have to see how tempo heavy the format plays out, but if it does, this could be even better than it looks. And in Constructed, I don't know, like the Amass thing might make it playable, but that highly depends on whether or not there will be like a heavy Amass focused spell heavy deck. But then I could see this making it into such a deck potentially just due to its flexibility. Then we have Commence the Endgame, another big Amass payoff card. 6 mana, can't be countered. Instant, you draw 2 cards, and then you amass X, where X is the number of cards in your hand. So this can easily end up being like a 4-4, 5-5 zombie for 6 at instant speed that can't be countered, and that also draws you 2 cards. Basically, as soon as this gives you like a 4-4 body, it's a really powerful card in Limited. We all remember the Phyrexian 6-drop, I don't remember the name. It's 6 mana, 4-4, draw 2 cards, lose 2 life. This is an instant, this can't be countered, this doesn't lose your life, and it has the potential to be bigger than 4-4. And also in a color combination that usually doesn't get that big bodies that easily. So, plus all the implications of Amass synergy, or just blowing out the opponent in combat due to being instant, or making an already existing zombie army so big that it eats a big attacker that the opponent was thinking would be a safe attack. So yeah, pretty powerful card, and one of the cards that also seems like one of the potential cards to fuel a constructed Amass-centric deck, but we'll have to see how viable that's gonna end up being. Then we have Contentious Plan. This is a bit underwhelming. I'm highly skeptical that Proliferate justifies costing an extra mana, because this is basically just a cantrip. Drawing a card with no other effect would usually cost 1 and be an instant. This is a sorcery. It costs 2 and the only upside is Proliferate. If you compare this to something like Opt, is Proliferate really that much better than, say, Scry 1? I hardly doubt that. Like, I think the card should either cost 1 or be an instant, but making it a sorcery and cost 2 is pretty heavy downside compared to similar cards, and I don't think Proliferate is that powerful. But yeah, I think the card might end up in some decks where it has a lot of benefits as a filler, because once again it is Proliferate here is a weak Amass one, so it has synergy with zombie armies in the sense that it grows them, but it can't start them, and there are synergies with Planeswalkers, so it might still be an okay card in Limited, but yeah, not a constructed playable card. And then we have Crush Descent, a 4 mana counter target spell unless its controller pays 2 and Amass 2, so it's just like a quench that costs twice as much but gives you Amass. It's not the best cost to effect ratio, given that we have stronger 4 mana counters and 4 mana counters, especially 4 mana conditional counters, and the conditional cost to pay is only 2, is a bit soft here, but yeah, the Amass synergy will make it like push it over the edge. It seems like a pretty decent card in Limited, at least. In Constructed, probably not even in an Amass deck. Then we have Erratic Visionary. Not a constructed card either. In limited, it's fine, but not great. Speaking of 2 mana 1/3s with upside, this one is a vanilla 2 mana 1/3 that for a blue and 1 and tap can loot, because they really dialed back on the quality of looters in the last couple of years, and this is another example of these. But yeah, if you kind of stalled out and or ran out of things to do with your mana, you can start looting at that point, so that's something. And if your deck is a bit more defensive, it provides a solid early game blocker, but nothing impressive. But I think it should be a fine 2-drop to round out your curve in more defensive decks. Next we have Eternal Skylord. Another pretty good amass card. Not sure if it's going to be good enough for an amass constructed deck, but in limited this is quite the powerhouse. First off, it amasses 2, so at the very worst it's a 5 mana 3/3 that gives you a 2/2 zombie token that has flying for as long as you have Skylord. And if you already have a zombie army, you suddenly have a pretty big flying zombie army. It's a bit unfortunate that you can't choose whether you make a new zombie army or amass on the big one, but that is an essential part in balancing these cards. They are designed with that in mind, because otherwise, if you could just spread them out, a card like Skylord would be much more powerful than it already is, for example. But yeah, seems like a pretty good or even premium uncommon in limited, probably premium, honestly. Making a big flying zombie usually wins limited games. Next we have Fibblethip, the Lost, basically an Elvish Visionary on steroids. It's a 2 mana 1/1 that draws your card if it enters the battlefield, and if it entered the battlefield from your library or was cast from your library, so basically if you, for example, play it with Experimental Frenzy off the top of your deck, or put it into play with something like, I don't know, Company, then you get to draw 2 cards in addition to getting the little 1/1 homunculus. Fibblethip finally has his own card. Lots of fan service in this one. Pretty cool. And the card's actually kind of nice. And when he becomes the target of a spell, you shuffle Fibblethip into its owner's library. So he kind of like just gets bounced around and keeps coming back and doesn't quite know what's going on. Quite flavorful here, and the card actually could be kind of interesting in constructed. Not sure if it's going to end up being viable, but it does some interesting things that might be exploitable. And in limited, I mean, the 2 mana 1/1 that draws a card is a totally fine card to put in your limited deck, so this will more often than not end up making your deck, I think. Then we have Finale of Revelation. It's basically Mindspring with some fancy upsides that don't come up very often, and sort of the downside of being exiled. So you draw X cards, or blue X, and if X is 10 or more, instead shuffle your graveyard into your library, draw X cards, untap up to 5 lands, and you have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. So you don't draw twice the amount of X, because it's a replacement effect, so you still draw X, but in addition you shuffle your graveyard into your library, and you also get to untap 5 lands, so basically it effectively only costs 7 instead of 12, but you have to muster the 12 up front. So yeah, these 10 cost things for these finales are pretty fringe and might come up in like older formats, mostly I would say, as potential ways to break these cards. But I mean, we all know how good Mindspring has been, or like Brain Gazier. Basically, that cannot target the opponent. And yeah, but last time this kind of effect was in Standard, it spawned a pretty powerful like blue-white tap-out control with like sort of cards similar to the white finale and the blue finale, but not sure how that's gonna go this time around. Also, we have quite some good competition. We have Chemisters inside, we have Teferi as ways to generate card advantage and also do other things and be a bit more flexible. So I'm not sure how playable this ends up being. In Limited, this is obviously a powerhouse that will just in a more grindy defensive deck just completely seal the game. So it is pretty powerful, and it might be constructed relevant, but I'm not sure if and how impactful it will be in constructed, just due to the other and as powerful or more powerful card advantage engines that we already have. So maybe it will have to wait till a rotation to be more impactful and dominant and constructed, but I could be wrong there. Now we have Flux Channeler, the 3-mana 2/2, and when you cast a non-creature spell, you proliferate. So another synergy card for the limited amass themed deck, basically, especially because a lot of the amass cards are spells themselves. So they basically amass and then they also proliferate from Flux Channeler onto the zombie army, making them grow real big, real fast. And even if they get reset, grow a decent-sized zombie army real quick again. So yeah, seems like a pretty solid card in Limited at the very least. If your deck is spell heavy enough, if you have a couple of Planeswalkers and or mass cards, can do some cool stuff. For Constructed, it seems a bit fragile and expensive for what it does, and probably isn't worth the hoops you have to jump through. So yeah. Next we have the Blue God Eternal, Kefnet. Not as broken and disgusting as the white one, but still a very good card. First off, we had a 4-mana 4/5 flying that's really powerful in Limited still, even though it doesn't do broken, unfair things compared to what the white one does, for example. But yeah, you may reveal the first card you draw each turn as you draw it. Whenever you reveal an instant or sorcery card this way, copy that card, and you may cast the copy. Copy costs 2 less to cast. So yeah, you basically can play a cheaper free version of a spell right away. But once again, Limited decks have only limited space for instants and sorceries. Also, it is situational. There are a fair share of things you might draw that you don't want to or cannot effectively use at the moment. But there's still some, obviously, power ceiling here where this card can just completely blow out the game by not just being a 4/5, but by also generating tons of advantage from that ability. But it's yeah, much more high variance and less broken than what the white one does. And yeah, if it dies or is put into an exile from the battlefield, you may put it into its owner's library third from the top. That's a line that we will find on all of the God Eternals. In Constructed, maybe, I mean, a 4-mana 4/5 flying for 4 is probably actually a bit more constructed playable than the white God Eternal. So Kefnet might actually be more constructed playable than Okatra. Next we have another Planeswalker, Jace, Wielder of Mysteries, triple blue and 1. A bit of a steep color requirement here for a 4-cost Planeswalker compared to what we are used to. Static ability, if you would draw a card while your library has no cards in it, you win the game instead. So basically, Laboratory Maniac attached to it. He has 4 loyalty. 4+1, target player puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. You draw a card, so you can either use it to mill your opponent or mill yourself to try and win with the passive, which is a bit risky. Also, in Limited, milling your opponent for 2, or even milling yourself for 2 plus drawing a card, which is effectively milling reducing your library size by 3, is both much more powerful than a Constructed, so this can win the game both ways. Much easier there and makes it really powerful. And yeah, we have a -8, draw 7 cards, then if your library has no cards in it, you win the game, so that also accelerates the process in Limited a lot, and also means that if you have exactly 8 loyalty, you can still -8 and win the game, even though the static ability from Jace is no longer around. In Constructed, not sure how playable this is. Requirement is very steep. We have a bunch of good Planeswalkers already. The utility of this Planeswalker is very limited. He cannot protect himself, he cannot impact the board, he just draws cards and mills. So actually doesn't seem that great in Constructed, but we'll see. Then we have Jace's Triumph. It's basically divination that if you control a Jace Planeswalker, it draws you 3 cards and turns into a 3 mana concentrate, which is pretty powerful. So yeah, in Limited, this is very decently playable either way, and if you have a Jace, it becomes pretty powerful, and in Constructed, it highly depends on if we have decks with Jaces. If we have Jace decks, this could actually be a pretty nice Constructed card in a deck that it fits, but not sure if there will be a deck that wants this in the end, so we'll have to wait and see. Sorry about that. Next we have another Planeswalker, Mina, Enigmatic Mentor. That's another new Planeswalker, a Planeswalker that a fair share of people and myself have thought might be Elspeth in the stained glass window artwork, because it looked a bit like Elspeth, but it turns out it's a new Planeswalker, Mina. 4 mana, 5 loyalty, like all the uncommon Planeswalkers we've seen so far. Decent static ability, nothing too big though. Spells your opponents cast that target a creature or Planeswalker you control cost 2 more to cast. So both in Constructed and Limited, this is a neat ability that makes it more awkward for your opponent to deal with your stuff, which is nice. And the -2 ability is actually pretty strong for this kind of Planeswalker. It creates a 2/2 wizard creature token, and then you get to loot. So not too bad. Probably not good enough for Constructed, but in Limited this seems like a pretty nice Planeswalker all in all, I would say, for an uncommon Planeswalker. And last but not least for the first half, we have Mina's Transmutation. It's a 2 mana aura that turns enchanted creature into a 1/1 creature with no abilities. So basically an aura version of spells of instance that we had in the past. Not a Constructed card clearly, but in Limited this seems like a pretty decent conditional removal at a similar level as pacifism and this sort of stuff. So yeah, or actually a bit better than pacifism, I would say. Sure, you can still kind of trade with the 1/1 or jump block or attack and stuff, but I think that is still less beneficial than being still able to use the abilities on your creature like you could with pacifism. So this seems like one of the best blue commons in the set, possibly. Because yeah, we all know how good these 2 or 3 mana enchantment removal, enchantment-based removals are in Limited, and this is no exception, I think. Alright, that concludes the first half of the blue cards for War of the Spark. Hope you guys are enjoying the series so far. Let me know in the comments what you think. Let me know what you think about the cards, where you disagree or where you think I under or overvalued cards. And of course, if you enjoy it, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification icon to not miss out on future content, and share it with your friends. And yeah, thanks for watching everyone. I'll see you tomorrow with the second half of the blue cards. Bye!